We are now returning to the vacation rental issue, and we didn't get to the presentations that we had agreed to before during the work session, so we're going to do those. And then I have a big stack of people who have signed up to speak.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ann Goldner, and I live within the River West neighborhood at 1744 Northwest 12th Street. I moved to Bend 12 years ago, and I purchased a house that had a conditional use permit for a bed and breakfast. So that's what I did. I started Hillside Inn Bed and Breakfast. I'm speaking to you because I do own one of those 3 bed and breakfasts, and because I deeply care about the city of Bend and our neighborhoods. I felt so deeply about the quality of life of this West Side community that I volunteered to be the chair of the River West Neighborhood Association for 8 years. I thought I understood my bed and breakfast business. I thought I knew my neighborhood. But in April of this year, 2014, I realized I did not. My bed and breakfast revenue had been steadily growing for the past 12 years. And then January, February, and March, the revenue was down 68% from the same period the year before. I decided to investigate, to do some research, and I love databases, so that's what I started. I was given the list of transient room taxpayers by the city, and also the list of the vacation rental permit recipients. I merged those 2 lists, and I created a database that I found was 533 addresses. I went to Dial, and I found out who the owner of those 533 properties were, and came up with some interesting information. Of the, well, you already know that of the homes, 41% are in River West, and the rest, another percentage is in Old Bend. Some examples are 17 vacation rentals on Federal, 11 on Columbia, 11 on Newport, 13 on Riverfront, 13 on Georgia. Of the 533 houses, only 101, that's 19% of the owners, live in that house. Perhaps these are the Airbnbs that, Mark, I think you were asking about Airbnbs, which, by the way, is a checkoff point on the vacation rental permit. So the Airbnb website says there's 330 in the Bend area, but there's 101 in this database. By the way, the only difference between my bed and breakfast and Airbnb is the process in which we get a permit. So if you want to have a traditional bed and breakfast, you need to pay the city $4,000 now for a conditional use permit, have 4 or less rooms, and live in the structure. Thus, there aren't any new bed and breakfasts in Bend, haven't been since I moved here. But there are 330 Airbnbs. Oh, the other thing is I may serve breakfast if I like. Of the 533 houses, 286 of those owners of these houses do not live in Bend. Think of them as investing, in a timeshare in the neighborhood. This is not a residential use. This is real estate speculation at the expense of my neighbors. Important to know, possession of a VR permit on a house is now considered by Bend Real Estate as a selling feature for the house. Be prepared to hire more staff because these permits are going to be pouring in very quickly. Why wouldn't any owner want to possess a vacation rental permit on their house, even if they don't plan to, at the moment, do a vacation rental? For $492 is all it costs. You could improve the value for future because that permit always remains on the property. Please, I beg you to do something now about this. The horse, I know, is out of the barn, unfortunately, because of this form. And by the way, you do have to have a business license, according to the form. Excuse me. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or share that database that I have. This is the moment to stop the issuance of the vacation rental permits. The summer is over. The businesses made their record profits this summer. The city has gathered record lodging taxes, and now our neighbors will experience the tourist off-season with its empty houses and its deserted city neighborhood. Thank you.
Please hold the applause. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
So with your time on the Neighborhood Association, you probably know more than about land use than most people here.
Maybe.
So when we saw the chart of possible options earlier, and the last two options, the cap or the temporary stop, we saw that, it's a 4 to 6 month process, and we'll probably end up at LUBA, and
it's very sad.
It's a mess.
Yes, it is.
So that being said, from your perspective, what do you think we ought to do?
I think you need to do whatever you need to do to stop these permits from coming in. By the way, for the month of September, if you look on your own database, there were 30 new permits issued for vacation rental, and the first time for an Airbnb, 5 of them. And 20 of those 30 had never been on the lists. So these are new vacation rentals coming on, not just the old ones that hadn't gotten a permit. I don't know what you can do legally to stop this, but it has to stop immediately. And the affordable housing piece, that's what you're missing on the affordable housing. That's where people used to live, in River West and Old Bend, and work. And it's gone. 400 and some houses are used now for vacation rentals. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name's Stephen Junkins, and I live at 851 Northwest Federal Street. And I'll give the last presentation here before the visitor session comments. And I've got just about 10 minutes worth of slides. Just to first of all, thank you for the time. We as residents of this town, we really appreciate you honoring that. Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and the councilors, and thanks for your public service. So just to tell you my own story very briefly, it's not what I want to concentrate on, but myself, my wife, Beth, and we've lived in our home for the most part of the last 14 years. We've raised our 2 kids there, and we love our home. We love our neighbors. We love our neighborhood. We love the community in our neighborhood, and we love Bend. I mean, we are passionate about what we have here. And but mostly over the last year is when the really intense change has happened. And it's very unfortunate, but it started happening, and I'll be very clear, our residentially zoned neighborhood. And many of our neighbors just disappeared. And unlike when a long-term rental, changes renters, or unlike when a homeowner changes homeowners, they weren't replaced with new neighbors. Instead, they were replaced with customers. And these customers change every 2 or 3 days. Sometimes they're awesome. Sometimes they're not awesome. But our neighborhood community was basically hollowed out from underneath us in a very subtle, stealthy way. In the shoulder seasons, there's a month or so when it's a complete ghost town. And what we have found is that our residentially zoned neighborhood and our home in it is surrounded by these high-traffic commercial hotel businesses. And in many cases, they are 15, 20 feet from our doorstep where we drink our coffee in the morning. We've had our share of parking problems, noise problems, parties, like strangers all around our homes. And I think, just to address the data that you had earlier, the reason you're not finding a plethora of police reports is when we have, we don't only call the police when it's an emergency. When we have a problem with our neighbor, we generally go, talk to the neighbor and say, hey, neighbor, this is not working out for me. Can we change this? Unfortunately, with this gold rush of vacation rentals, our neighbors change every couple of days, and anything that we worked on with them last week is just lost and evaporated. Moreover, when we sort of pull back from that, who do we talk to next? Do we talk to the owner? Do we talk to the property manager? It's actually very confusing who are our neighbors. And if you like, we'll all start, bombarding the police department with our calls every time that there's a bad parking job. We don't actually think that's civically responsible, but I think you're sort of hoping the data's there when it's not. This is usually worked out between neighbors. So how did this happen? We doubt there's any ill intent, but as we started talking amongst ourselves, we started attending planning meetings, which is a very odd thing for us to do. We started spending Saturday mornings reviewing the database that Annie had built, reviewing permit data, reviewing transient room tax data. We started reading zoning code. Zoning code on a Saturday morning. We started reading zoning code in other cities, and we're trying to make sense of what's happening. And really what we want to share with you here is what we have learned, and we're grateful for the presentation tonight. We would have loved to have seen that 3 or 4 months ago when we were trying to make sense of this ourselves, or even a year ago. So this is some of the same data, but a few different looks at it, and I think it'll offer some unique perspectives. So just very briefly to dive into this, what we think you'll see is that Bend's current lax vacation rental process. It is dismantling neighborhood communities. It is taking housing away from the people that live and work here, and it is way out of the norm from most similar cities. Most cities protect their residential neighborhoods for residents that live and work here. They are not commercial districts. So the first place that we started with data is that we're going to a neighborhood association meeting one night, and our 14-year-old son says, hey, Mom, Dad, look at this. And he pulled up two equal-sized areas on HomeAway.com. It's an advertisement site for vacation rentals. And these are the same size areas, same map scale. What you see on the left is Portland and Southeast Hawthorne neighborhood, a very hip, happening, desirable neighborhood. And then you see Bend in the lower right, and that's the area that you've seen in a couple other maps. And basically, the map in the upper left, this is what you get when you have city leadership and city code that protects residential neighborhoods. The couple of vacation rentals that are there, they're actually in mixed-use commercial zones, and some of them are 30 days or longer. In Portland, it is flat out illegal to have a vacation rental in a residentially zoned neighborhood. And you can hear that sort of reflected in the leadership of Portland Mayor Charlie Hales. He says, remember why we have residential zoning in the first place. If I live in a single-family neighborhood, I have a reasonable right to expect that I live in a single-family neighborhood and that the next block or the next lot is not going to be used for commercial use. The Bend Bulletin did us all a service, I think, we think motivated by the maps that our own coalition was generating. They made an attempt to do one of these first maps, and so this is just the transient room tax map. It's obviously thin on some of the data, as I think you heard earlier. And then just to concentrate on a couple of the areas, what's outlined in orange here, these are three areas that I think you heard earlier in Carolyn's presentation. These are three streets or blocks that are well north of 50%. 50% of the homes in these residentially zoned neighborhoods have been removed from residents. You can't rent there, you can't live there. You could stay there 2 days at a time, but it doesn't work for most people that live and work here and raise families here. Our own neighborhood is in this green box, and I don't want to dwell on it, but it's a useful example to see what's going on. So this is a zoom-in look around the 8 blocks or so in our own neighborhood. In our own street, it depends on how you count, but 27% of our street has already been converted to vacation rentals. Most of the blocks are 15, 17, 20%. Block 2 over is 40%. Notice that we are in easy walking distance of Westside Village School, also Amity Creek Elementary, also Highland Elementary. We're in easy walking distance of Harmon Park, the public library. A phenomenal amount of public infrastructure has been built for residents to walk and attend schools and parks and make use of. That is being given over to commercial businesses and to the tourism industry. The neighbor, and by the way, maybe just a comment, I saw the 30% number earlier. In the research that we've done, that is an extraordinary cap. We have not found a city that has a 30% cap. Most are in the single-digit range if they allow it, and it's a minority of towns that allow vacation rentals like this. But what's happening in Bend is way beyond the norm of what most cities allow, even if they do allow it. This is the neighborhood consensus of what we think will happen in the next 6 to 8 months, assuming that it's business as usual. So these pink properties, we don't know for sure, but many of these are among the new properties that have applied for vacation rental permits. Many of the homeowners have indicated that they intend to make a vacation rental. And so that's what we think will happen. What we know for sure is that there is zero protection in our code right now. There is zero protection in the city to prevent 100% of this residential neighborhood being converted to vacation rentals. There is nothing to protect this from becoming Mount Bachelor 2.0. And this is a residential neighborhood. There is no protection for residents. So here's another look at the vacation rental permit data that was brought up earlier. So this is a graph of vacation rental permits that from 2005 and through 2014. We don't have the September data that Annie mentioned earlier. The trend is startling. This is an extreme curve, and I didn't bother to take this graph out to what will happen in 2015 or to 2017, but I think you can easily imagine, and I want you to look at that graph and think again about what you've heard tonight about additional dwelling units. Do you really think that those are going to be used for solving our housing crisis, or do you think that those are going to become just simply more vacation rentals? The height of this curve is the height of our inaction on this issue. And the longer this curve grows and the higher it grows, the more responsibility we have for not stopping this and not losing our residentially zoned neighborhoods. A couple of comments from the planning department. So according to their database, of the applications that they received, just under 98% are approved, complete, or active. And that's back to that sort of 300 number that you heard earlier from Carolyn. The planning department has told us in our conversations with them, it is a rubber stamp permit. They have told us we do not inspect for compliance on parking issues. This is this type 1 permit. There's no renewal. There's no expiration date specified on these permits. Other cities have a far higher bar on the permits if they allow it at all. So a couple more data. So this 0.04% is sort of an extraordinary number on the long-term housing availability, rental housing availability. That's the bulletin's number. I think there's no debate that it's less than 1%. And, hey, what's a tenth or a hundredth of a percent among residents? But just contrast that number with this, in Annie's database, 503 vacation rentals. Those are 503 houses that are not being made available for mixed income or for long-term rentals. And they're the houses that are in the walkable urban core of our cities. I mean, if you don't own a car or you want your kids to be able to walk to school, it's these 503 houses, these 2-bedroom, small, cottage-style, old mill worker houses that are not available as long-term housing availability. So I think you heard some of these statistics earlier. 43% of these owners, by one measure of this database, appear to live out of town. 51% of them are not owner-managed. They're certainly not vacation rental by owner. These are professionally managed by third-party property companies. And I think, as Annie alluded to earlier, this leads to this phenomenon of vacation rental investing in our town. Here's a Bend, Oregon Homes blog. It's managed by a real estate agency that is ironically named Preferred Residential. And here's a quote from their website. Real estate investors in Bend are fortunate to have a way to make money on their investment properties that isn't available in many cities, is not available in many cities. Investors can turn the properties into vacation rentals. By the way, this blog goes on to quote a vacation rental property manager in town who believes that we have 600 vacation rentals. Who knows what reality is, but there's another number to research. So that leads us to, here's our Saturday mornings. We're reading zoning code. We're zoning out, reading zoning code. We have discovered 2 discrepancies in the Bend code, and we'd like to make you aware of them because we think they're pertinent to this issue. So it's a little wonky, but just bear with us. I think you'll understand it quickly. Here's a table on permitted land uses in residentially zoned neighborhoods. RS is residential. And this one says vacation rentals require a conditional use permit. You guys often call that a type 2 permit. So there's the conditional use defined as type 2. Here is another table from the very same edition of the very same Bend zoning code. And it says that a vacation home rental only requires a type 1 permit. So this is a little, zoning code wonky stuff, but type 2 permits, they require a hearing, they require neighbor input, they require a site plan, they require inspection, and they're often denied by the city for very good reasons. A type 1 permit, this is the rubber stamp permit that the planning department is currently handing out. It has none of those requirements. It's merely procedural. You pay $400 odd and you get a permit. This is a clear contradiction in the zoning code. It exists today. Here's another one. There's a stricter parking requirement also listed in the zoning code, and this requirement says that vacation rentals require 1 space per bedroom plus 1 space for the property manager or the owner. So for example, if you have a 2-bedroom vacation rental, it actually requires 3 off-street parking spaces per this regulation in the zoning code. If that vacation rental does not have those 3 off-street parking spaces, it is not in compliance with the rules that we already have on the books. So why does all this matter? So, okay, somebody, didn't do the, cut and paste properly in the zoning code. The reason it matters is that the first chapter of the zoning code says very clearly, it has a rule called the most restrictive regulations apply. And it says, I'll read it, where this code contains conflicting standards, the most restrictive, or that imposing the higher standard shall govern. That's chapter 1.1. So, we're reading zoning code on a Saturday morning, so we didn't know if we had this right or not. We asked a local land use attorney, and I have his letter here for council. And he basically agrees with the assessment that we had. And he says in the letter here, I'll just exert, so first of all, he's calling clearly for a moratorium to stop issuing further permits right now. But some of the other things that he says in his letter to council, he says, this presents a conflict in code language between vacation rentals as permitted type 1 usage, that's the rubber stamp permit, and conditional uses, that's the type 2, where you actually have to ask your neighbor, hey, would it be okay if I did this high traffic commercial business next door to you for the next 5 years? So, and also he acknowledges that the off-street parking is also not being guidance is not being given out, the stricter off-street parking. So I'll leave you for that and your time after the meeting. The good news in all of this, so as troubling as this has been for us as residents and neighbors and concerned citizens of this committee, we see a lot of good news in the success models of other cities. Many of the statistics that were quoted earlier, we believe that the city started looking at them because we had to go do the homework to find out what this stuff is how this stuff works in other cities, and we've been sending you letters trying to get you to look at these other models. Just to summarize them briefly, Model 1 is what most cities do. So Portland, Ashland, Depot Bay, Garibaldi was miscited earlier, but these cities all absolutely disallow vacation rentals in residentially zoned neighborhoods. It's illegal. And this is similar for BIN neighborhoods. Many of you may live in a neighborhood that has a homeowners association or has CC&Rs like Northwest Crossing, for example. These neighborhoods in Bend, they don't allow vacation rentals. Those of us that live in the close-in neighborhood, our homeowners association is you. It is the city of Bend. You are our homeowners association. The second model is what we'll call this is a progressive model. It's not widely done, but a few of them do allow vacation rentals. Durango is a really interesting model for Bend to look at. It has a lot of qualities similar to Bend. Closer to home, Manzanita and Cannon Beach and Austin, and Cannon Beach was mentioned earlier. And what they do, the most important thing that these other cities do in their zoning code is they tightly manage the vacation rental density. They realize that these are high traffic commercial businesses that are a nuisance to residential neighborhoods. So in Durango, they allow about 5% per block. There's some stricter rules about whether they can be co-located on the same street side and that kind of stuff. Cannon Beach, as was correctly mentioned earlier, has 92 total permits. The statistic of 17.5%, which is the largest allowance we've read about, is actually not Garibaldi, it's Manzanita, Oregon. And Manzanita has this 17.5% cap, and they have a waiting list that is hundreds deep to get to the permits that they do have available. Austin has some innovative policies. You can look at an interactive map of the number of permits that are available per neighborhood in Austin. But all of these are, for the most part, except for Manzanita, they're single-digit percentages of what's allowed. Even as you heard Annie speak earlier about bed and breakfasts, part of the reason we don't have a bed and breakfast gold rush is that our own code actually has a density requirement on bed and breakfasts. We don't allow one every 400 feet. You can't have two within 400 feet. These other cities, their vacation rental permits, they require neighbor input in their residential neighborhoods before the city approves, and that's absolutely critical. There's lots of interesting rules here. I'll just list them quickly, but just vacation rentals are subject to annual renewal, rejection, reallocation. I think we heard some of that in Carolyn's presentation. One permit per property owner is a really good rule. Manzanita has that. Require that the permit number is on all ads, signs, and agreements. Durango does this because it makes enforcement easy. If you see an ad on Craigslist that doesn't have a permit number, that one's illegal. You can, visit them as you need to. Allow it if the owner lives in the home for most of the year. Some of us are going to, go to Mexico for the summer, or we have a sabbatical or somewhat. That's a different deal. If the homeowner needs to go away for a few months, it's not a full-time, high-traffic commercial business. Owner-occupied, owner-adjacent. These are good rules. And in terms of the permit fees, we would recommend that you tie them to the property tax, because the property tax, increases every year. So just pick a percentage. Call it 50% of the annual property tax, or whatever you need to run the administration end of your compliance check. So here's the last slide. what we're asking you to do to protect Bend's residential neighborhoods. Number one, we hope that the city will fully acknowledge the problems with Bend's current permitting. We are asking you to take action tonight. Do not leave here without taking action. Stop now. No more permits until new permit rules are passed. The Planning Commission has told us they want to work on this fall. Awesome. Let's be clear, they're working on it, okay? So we'll work on it, but let's not do any new permits until we've gotten past these new rules that the Planning Commission wants to work on. Number two, we want to help. You know, we invested all of these Saturday mornings reading about zoning code, learning about this stuff. So we would ask that you appoint a 5 to 7 resident commission to recommend new zoning code rules. You have commissions, similar commissions for urban growth boundary and other issues. This is an easy one. We've studied these zoning codes in other cities. We have common sense compromise ideas. We're not out for anything draconian. We just need protection of our residential neighborhoods. Number three, we know it's a bitter pill to swallow, but you have to bring the existing permits into compliance. And that's both compliance with these current type 2 and off-street parking requirements. That's the contradiction that you have. That's the problem you already have in your current zoning code or in our current zoning code. And number two, if we're going to be rewriting these rules and figuring out what kind of city for residents that we really want, we want to make sure that all the permits are in compliance. Other cities have dealt with this and have figured out ways to deal with it. We think, again, there are compromise opportunities here. You can have grace periods. You can create incentives to create the right behavior. But this has to be dealt with. The city has allowed this problem to occur, and we can't let the height of that graph double next year. It doubled this past year. You know, it's growing at one last statistic. I think Victor told us that the tourism tax rate income for Bend is growing at 10% a year. Is that right? Vacation rentals are growing at 10 times our revenue for tourism taxes. 10 times. That is not sustainable. And you will not have a town that any of us recognize if you allow that to continue. So please, take a vote tonight. Stop issuing further vacation rentals. Let's fix this problem and move forward as a city. And thank you very much. I appreciate your time.